how will we interact with peeps? Like, are they going to come on Zoom too, or?
Yes. So some of them are gonna join in a bit.
Okay.
And we should be able to. So let's see.
Oh, it's currently summer out. Nice. It was winter like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, they can't really make up their minds, right?
Was this snowing where you are?
Oh, it was bad like 10 minutes ago, like really bad. Now it literally is like clear blue skies out there. It looks sunny and gorgeous. I'm sure it's still freezing cold, but so weird, eh? Last weekend was like almost 30.
Yeah.
Summer.
In US today, it's about 30 degrees, a couple of places. Okay, so
aside from that one day where the temperature was above 20,
yeah,
this would have been like a record-breaking streak of cold weather for us.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This late into the year, I guess? Seems to be getting later and later, I feel like. Last winter was the same. Like, it didn't start getting nice until like end of May.
Yeah, we did have a really mild winter though, so if that's the trade-off, then
yeah,
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, I'm just gonna share with people to join in.
Adam, what have you been up to?
I'm just trying to like upgrade my skills, so to speak, with the free time that I have. So I've been spending a ton of time at my studio and working on my photography. And yeah, been like definitely.
Are you guys still taking in clients?
No, we're fully closed. So it's just like I have the space sitting empty. I've got cameras, I've got lights. It's like, why not take advantage of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been great. I've really been enjoying it.
I saw you taking the photos of those model cars. Turned out really well. The Porsche I thought was real.
Thanks, man.
The Porsche I actually thought was real. I don't remember. There's another one that you posted, and I had to do a double take, but I'm like, I figured it out.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I was hoping. I wanted people to think they were real. Yeah, for sure. What about you?
All right, so we're getting the people joining in. So,
I've just been spending my time making music. I got my car back on the road a couple days ago, so sort of in the honeymoon phase of that. And
your Beamer on the road again?
That's right. Just waiting for some parts to come in from Bill Stein in California. I got some custom valved shocks to go with my springs and redoing the whole suspension. So
nice.
What's up, Mandy? What's going on? We can't hear you though.
You're muted, Mandy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool.
Hello.
Welcome to our chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think there's a feedback from someone's. I don't know whose it is.
Is it me?
I don't know.
Shouldn't be.
How do I get it so my phone doesn't ding through my laptop?
Oh, that's what I heard. Yeah.
I have no idea.
All right, and hey there, Mahmoud. Is that how you spell your name? You probably have to mic up.
What's up, Mahmoud? We can't hear you though. You're muted.
Yeah, you have to. You're muted.
It mutes by default.
Now good?
Yeah.
Hey, there we go. We can hear you now.
Hi.
All right. So I think we are waiting for 2 more people. I don't know if they're joining in now. Let's take a look here.
Saad, you broke the illusion, man. Now we won't be able to guess whether or not you have a camera crew in your studio.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's this app. It's this app. I'm like really enjoying it. Probably gonna made it like 4 cameras next time.
Yeah,
like
that's right. You need
4
one
cell
above
phones.
you.
Have like 4 cell phones, like
over your shoulder.
Yeah. All right, so welcome to the first studio session and first Twitch session actually for me. I kind of thought about doing this for a long time, doing like a proper Twitch session, but I guess due to time constraint and not being able to stay online most of the time, I didn't really get the chance to do so. But with COVID-19, everyone has time on their hands, so we are able to do this quite often now. Especially a lot of our colleagues are doing it, so why not? So a little bit about myself before we get started. Since it's Twitch, I know there's an option to discover my channel. I just want to say that my name is Saad. Most of you know me as Saad Ayub, DJ and a producer. Based in Canada, fully Canadian, as of 2019. And I started off as promoter when I was 18 or 19, and then fell in love with the art of DJing, and from there moved on to production side and become a producer back in 2014. And from then, I was able to sign a couple of records in some of the biggest names in the industry, such as Armada, as well as Flashover and many others such as Bandit, and had the opportunity actually to collaborate with some of the biggest names such as Paul Van Dyke, Faye Corsons, and many more. And recently, which is actually from last year, I'm also an owner of a record label. I mean, start a record label. I don't know where it's going, but I think it's going in the right direction. And I kind of want to actually touch base on that with you guys as well today. And with that being said, I have invited a couple of people through my social media today to kind of explain some of the process that I do in terms of music productions and what are the things we look for in terms of a record that we want to sign for VRTN. So I have Andy joined in today with me. Andy is a very good friend of mine that I first met back in 2013 for one of this festival that I was playing. And what happened with that festival is that there was a little bit of a technical difficulties, and then his set completely got cut off. So he wasn't able to play. And we felt so bad because he won the contest and he was very excited to like play this set, but he wasn't able to actually do so. So we thought, you know what, maybe I play half an hour less, and one of these other DJ, I told him like maybe we can go back to back and give him a half an hour and let him play, and he was able to. And ever since then we became friends. And yeah, it's been what, 7 years now that I know you.
Something like that, yeah. It's been a while. Shit.
Yeah, so 7 years. And so with him, we kind of like, it's been like almost a journey for me, because with my music production kind of evolved. I can actually help. I never took mentors, like being a mentor to people, but I never took someone under my wing to like mentor, like in terms of music productions, except Andy, because I thought he was very knowledgeable when it comes to like music productions, basically, especially because he's classically trained as well. So for that reason, I've been kind of mentoring him for since he started producing music back in 2015 or so. And with that being said, with everything that's been happening in my career, he kind of like tagged along with the whole journey and the process. So and that involves VRTN, which is the record label, where I kind of actually have him to do most of my A&R or like the feedback technical side of the things. And with everything else, plus a lot of A&Ring, comes my manager and my very good friend and brother, Adam.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know a lot of you guys know who Adam is. Those of you who are watching it on YouTube or on Twitter. But those of you who don't know on Twitch, maybe Adam and Andy, you guys can give a little bit of introduction. So let's start with Adam. Give a little bit of introduction to yourself, what you do in terms of us being as a brand, as Saad Ayub, and plus VRTN.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a pretty long-winded answer to that question as far as like what I do, but I'll try and simplify things. You know, I basically, I think of myself as sort of Saad's right hand, if you will. And kind of like his advisor on all things, not just with music, or production or marketing or brand, but really just in life in general, whether he sees me that way or not, that's definitely how I see myself.
100%.
And that's the role that I try to play, because I think that he needs that support so that he can really focus on what he does best, which is like be creative and make music and kind of think bigger picture that way, and not have to get caught up in the weeds about, you know, the day to day and making all the little decisions. So I think that's really what my role comes down to.
Yeah, that's definitely is. And a little bit of what you do other than just like being my manager. Just want to know.
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. I run a studio. It's a film and photography studio, and we basically have it's a facility, so it's a place, you know, people can rent it. And then in that facility, we also have all kinds of lighting and equipment to support for video and photography production. So I own that space and I rent it out to people. We have all kinds of cool music videos, commercials. We even support, like we've had some Hollywood movies do their sort of photography with us. So if you saw like a billboard for the movie Shazam, for example, anything you saw for Shazam, that was all shot in our studio. So we get a lot of cool work like that. And then I also shoot photos myself. I'm a photographer as well. So I get to dabble and be creative as well myself.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my music videos, by the way, including Ever After with Jaren. I mean, even Move On, he was like, the way how I met Adam actually was with Move On music video. So when I first signed my very first vocal track and my very first major label signing, which was on Armada with Who's Afraid of 138. The track was called Move On with Jennifer Renee. And on that track, we went to do a music video shoot, and we needed like a lot of cameos and a lot of characters. And Adam was one of my biggest fan. He was always there front and center on every single show that I performed here in Toronto. So, and we needed someone to actually have a car, and he actually had a really nice car, and he was the cameo for that particular music video. And ever since then, we built up a relationship, and I needed a manager. And he first said that he had no idea what he wanted to do. Like, I was like, hey, that's perfect, because I want to grow, and I think we can grow together. And like, fast forward to this 2020, that was what, 2015?
16, I think.
16. So yeah, here we are. All right, so that was an introduction for Adam. Let's get with Andy. So Andy, let's talk about yourself and about your role here in VRTN.
Okay, cool. So for those of you that aren't familiar with me, my name's Andy. I also produce music under the name Andy Teixeira. I'm a artist and producer based out of Toronto as well. My sort of musical journey didn't really start with electronic music itself. I studied at a Pontifical Institute of Sacred Music for 10 years of my life. Had the opportunity to become a concert pianist as well as a choral performer. You know, had the opportunity to tour all across Canada and the United States doing that, performing with various like symphony orchestras and participating in like international choral competitions and things of that nature. The whole electronic music thing, although it's always been something I've been passionate about and something I've been, you know, immensely interested in, you know, I've only sort of become involved with it myself recently, so to speak. I mean, like, it's been almost 7 years now, but in relative terms, that's sort of recent for me. So that's sort of what my musical background is. So as A&R of VRTN, basically what I aim to do is I aim to use my expertise to sort of provide feedback and constructive feedback, primarily, well, almost exclusively. That's the whole point, isn't it? To anyone that's sending us a track that would basically involve me, you know, performing a sort of musical analysis of the track from top to bottom. You know, sort of dissecting the individual musical elements, making sure the harmonics work throughout, talking about things like sound and texture and timbre, and making sure that, you know, all the aspects of the track are cohesive and make sense together. And I appreciate that A lot of people coming into the electronic music space don't have that classical background. They haven't necessarily had the opportunity to be educated in things like music theory or harmony, and you know, things of that nature. So I'd like to sort of bring that expertise to the table, however I can, and make sure that, you know, the music that we release and the music that we produce sounds better for it. I've had experience with other labels in the past where their A&R teams are they're very hands-off, and the feedback that they provide is generally vague. And in some instances, after receiving feedback from the label as to what they want you to change, you end up being more confused than you were when you went in the first place. So that's sort of what I want to change. I want to change how people do A&R. You know what I mean? I want to change the dynamic between labels and artists in such a way that if you're asking for feedback, or let's say you send us a track and it's not 100% there yet, I want you to know exactly what it is that we're talking about, you know, in very specific terms. I don't want there to be this sort of ambiguous, nebulous doubt floating over your head that often leads to people getting frustrated with that entire process, because I know that it's happened to me, and I know that it's happened to Saad as well. So anything we can do to sort of you know, increase the level at which we are producing and performing music, I'm all for it. So that's what I do. That's my sort of MO, and that's a little bit about me.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest reason I actually started Variation or VRTN, is that having a little bit of freedom of what you do musically. And the reason behind that is because for like the very first I started VRTN because I switched my sound quite a bit. I know a lot of my old school fans, if you guys are tuning in, I know if you guys are still upset, but I switched from trance to a bit more broader spectrum of music. I won't just pigeonhole into say it's house or it's techno or it's pop or chill out. To be honest with you, I don't care. For me, good music is good music, and that's all it matters to me. And so when I announced that I'm kind of switching a little bit, so I used to have a radio show called Tranced, and since I switched my sound, and it just didn't make sense for me to, like, you know, false advertise saying, oh, this is trance music, which is not. So I switched into VRTN as the radio show. But from then, the acceptance of the brand was so high in terms of, like, in a short amount of time. And I felt like, you know what, it requires and it deserves to be something even broader than just a radio show. So that's when I actually spoke with Adam about, you know, maybe we should do like a record label and just release tracks. First, just release my own tracks, because I just wanted to release tracks that I felt it was great for me, and I felt that it deserves like a release. Sometimes working with bigger labels, there's so much confinement, and they put you in a box, and then that box needs to be shiny to their like taste, which basically makes me at some point feel like it wasn't even my sound. Like it felt like by the time it was out of the window and it's like release, it felt like it lost its touch and soul. So that was the biggest reason I started this label. And in a span of a year, the way how it was been accepted by a lot of my peers, colleagues, and even the industry people as well it's very humbling for me. And for that reason, starting from actually, I would say like from this Twitch session, I'm kind of opening it up for anyone and everyone to like send us demos, and basically we can like sign tracks that we felt it deserves a release. This is not a label for like us to make money. You can tell it's a passion project, and with a passion project, we just want to see where it goes. I mean, if it becomes a money tree, sure. I mean, that's not something we are expecting. It's something we want to make a change into the scene. So it's something that we kind of do, and maybe in 10 years or 20 years down the line, we should be all proud of. That's what my goal is about VRTN. So I actually invited a couple of you through my socials. Some of you got the direct invite to join in me today in this Zoom meeting. And those of you who didn't, I suggested you guys to join in through Twitch. So if you're joining in and listening to me or watching me through Twitch or YouTube or Periscope, please make sure to leave a question or comments. I would be able to actually reply to that after as well. So let's get started. Let me just see here quickly. Okay. So first, I invited actually 2 or 3 of you. And I'm just want to get you guys the mic to kind of like mic up and give a quick introduction. Even if you're new, don't feel shy. Remember when I first started, I had no idea how to DJ. So I'm just going to quickly give you guys these 2 histories here and there, bits and pieces, because I really love sharing these stories. So when I first DJ'd, it wasn't even my own show. I was there as an attendee. This is back in 2007. My friend was throwing an event and their DJ bailed. And I used to play around with virtual DJ. So I was like, oh, so there's like almost 400 people waiting for that DJ to come. And there was like a 2-hour gap in between because the airport, they missed the flight and they was like almost late to actually attend the show. So they asked me to play some music and I had no idea how to DJ. I just pressed play on the CDJs. And from there on, I just became a DJ. And they started calling me by DJ name as well, which I had no idea what it was, man. So just giving you an idea, like if you're starting new, just go for it. Like, don't think too much. When it comes to production, same thing. I self-taught myself on everything in terms of DJing, in terms of music production. With the music production, I got a lot of my colleagues helping me out with the advanced skills, but my basics has been self-taught as well. Even music video productions and stuff too, which I kind of try to do as well. All of these are self-taught. So learning, you can learn anything and everything every day. I still learn every day. Like I just got that new grandmother. I'm like learning and I'm so excited to do so. So learning, there's no limit. There's no constriction when it comes to learning. With that being said, I will give you guys the mic. So let's start with Amanda. You can give a quick introduction on where you're from and what kind of music you produce.
Hi guys, I'm Amanda. I'm from Seattle. I've only been producing music for like almost 2 years, but I was in the city orchestra for like 6 years, 7 years, and I took piano lessons for like 5 years. I have a little bit of musical training, but this whole DAW thing is pretty new to me. That's my story. Perfect.
All right. So then we have Ian. So a little bit of a quick, like a story behind how I know Ian is, it was through what was the brand called? Nocturnal, Elaine's brand. I forgot. I think your mic is muted.
Neon Owl.
Neon Owl. There you go. So 2 years ago, I was playing in Amsterdam for the Amsterdam dance event. Ian actually interviewed me for Neon Owl, and that's how we first met him. And then I actually met him just before the COVID outbreak in Amsterdam with his girlfriend. So I got to know that he's actually also started to produce music, and I thought he should joining in today just to know like a little bit of the basics. Perfect. All right, and then so Ian, give a quick introduction to yourself. I think your audio is not working. Yeah.
No.
Okay. I'll let you figure that out in the meantime. Okay. Then we have Mahmoud you're from Egypt, right?
Yeah, I'm from Egypt, but now I'm living in Poland.
Poland. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So give us a quick intro.
Yeah, well, I have nothing to do with music except I have started DJing like 5 years ago just for fun. parties with my friends and stuff like that. And like 2 years ago, I started with music production, but still I am total beginner because I have been on and off. And what I do for a living, I'm an ex-airline pilot, and currently I'm just a mobile developer.
Nice.
Did you say you're a pilot?
Oh,
Sorry?
cool.
Did you say you're a pilot for an airline?
I'm an ex-airline pilot.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's awesome. I actually added him for this Zoom meeting right away because he shared a project he's working on. It's Deep House, and it sounded great.
Thanks.
So even if you started new, I think that's great. So maybe we can talk about that track and sign it to VRTN.
I hope.
All right, cool. So all right, so let's get started. I'm just going to show you guys a couple of things here. Before we start, like about the technicalities of a couple of projects and a couple of elements that I wanted to talk about for this particular studio session, I want to show you guys my studio. But before I do that, I just want to let you guys know that when it comes to music productions, you don't need a lot of gears. When I first started, only thing I had was a MIDI keyboard, which cost me like $20. You definitely want to invest on proper audio interface, but you can start with like $100 audio interface or even like $50. Like there's no limit when it comes to production or producing music. I just moved my studio from my bedroom to a proper room after 10 years because I just felt it was not necessary for me to like actually have a dedicated space for studio. All my hit tracks were produced in my bedroom studio, and my track with Jaren or my track with Jennifer Renee, any of the tracks with Ferry Corsten or Paul Van Dyke, all the ideas first actually came from my bedroom. Like zero acoustical treatment, either on headphones or just very minimal studio gear. So let me just switch and show you guys around what I've been up to. So my studio, I'm working on it right now, and it's about 80% done. I need to finish up the audio treatment, the acoustic treatment right now. And I actually need to also fix the lighting a little bit because I feel like the lighting is not done properly. But here we go. So I'll start from here. So I have these headphones right now. I used to use very regular headphones before, but I just got these ones recently. These are basically called the Bear Dynamics DD990 Pro. I'm just gonna fix the mirroring. Hold on. There you go. All right, so these are basically probably the best headphones in my opinion. Sometimes on Amazon they actually have some sales, so you might be able to get this for like $150 or like $100 even during the Christmas sales. I have a very regular keyboard.
I have the same ones in the closed back format, and they're definitely the best value for money that you'll get for a production headphone, like by far.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like especially with those headphones, I feel it's not too much to actually understand the low end processing, at least for mine, because these are like 250 ohms, and these are open mic. There's open ones and there's the closed ones. So mine ones are like the open end ones. And the best part about these ones are like the high frequencies and the studio spectrums. The studio spectrums and the high frequency for these headphones are probably the best because it gives you the most flattest response you can ever get. So it's not really coloring your actual audio. So when you're hearing and when you're making music, it's only going to give you exactly how you're making music. So if it's muddy, it will sound muddy. If it's too high and harsh on the frequency, it will only gonna be harsh on the frequency. So that's the biggest reason. I always tell Andy like how every single time I use the term surgical production. So I basically do a surgery after like producing everything on my studio monitors. Then I will go back on my headphones and fix the spectrum and fix the EQing and everything.
And then you'll bounce it to me and I'll play it in my car.
Exactly. And then because the reason I don't use headphones solely to produce is because you want to hear how it sounds when someone is actually using it on a regular speakers or like in a TV or like in headphones. So start with the studio speakers and then go with your headphones to do the final mix down. So that way you know exactly what you're making the mistakes and where were the mistakes. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about is my microphone. I was actually telling that to one of my friends just a couple of minutes ago. So these microphones are actually a bit different than typical microphones that most of the people use. People normally tend to get a condenser microphone. I use something called a drum mic. The reason I use a drum mic versus a condenser microphone is that I'm not a singer. So I don't need like a wide spectrum of vocal processing rather than I need exactly what it needs to do, which is basically me talking over the mic and making sure that you guys hear it very loud and clear and my accurate voice. One thing I want to mention is that when it comes to human voice, the frequency range is actually about 500 hertz and below where it's normally where it actually shines. Anything over that, it's normally where you kind of have to use DSR and everything to like cut off the EQ and cut off the frequency for the de-essing or hissing sounds. So for that reason, I use this mic. And actually my very first demo draft with JR and the track Hurt was recorded on this mic. So it works. It's the microphone brand is, I mean, again, by the way, everything that I'm showing you guys, none of this is endorsed by anybody. These are just the products that I use and I love them. And I think their brands are great. So this particular microphone is Sennheiser. It's a drum mic. And then I'm going to move over to my speakers. So I don't have crazy expensive speakers. This particular set of speakers is actually discontinued now. It's same company who does KRK. And they actually started with this brand first. It's called the IK Audio. And then they discontinued this particular model to KRK afterwards. The reason I got this one, I did a lot of research before I got like a economical studio speakers because at that point I didn't have the money to actually spend like, $1,000 on getting a pair of studio speakers. Now, fast forward 8 years now, I still been using this because I'm so used to the frequency range and response on the speakers that I don't really need another like expensive speakers to do like my projects, because whatever I produce with these speakers has been doing well extremely on Spotify and everywhere else. So why do I need it? And I test this tracks out afterwards in a big club or festivals, and it's working great. So, I mean, I'm probably going to end up getting another pair of speakers down the road, but for now it's still doing great. So it's the iKey 5, and it's unfortunately it's not available anymore in the market, but it's also very, very flat when it comes to the response. And the low end is very great response as well. So I don't really need a sub to actually compensate the low end as well. And moving over to my synthesizers, basically I use something called Roland SEO2, the boutique one. I'm pretty sure Ian has one and Andy has one as well. And I also got the extension box with it. Basically what it does is, I'm just gonna put it right here. Okay, so basically what this particular synthesizer, it replicates the sound of Moog, the Mini, and it does even a lot more than just replication of Moog. It actually, first of all, it's my very first analog synth. I used a lot of software synthesizers before, and I still do. Some of my top picks for software synthesizers are Diva, Serum, GAP8 from Arturia, SAM-V2, and Oberhausen from Plugin Alliance. I use that a lot too. But then we decided we want to do a little bit of analog sounding because of my recent switch to techno, because a lot of the techno low end and the thicker sound comes actually from analog synthesizers. And for that reason, we thought, okay, maybe we should get something that is a little bit economical as a beginner synthesizer. So for me and also for Andy, I think we both bought at the same time. And Andy can vouch for this particular synthesizer. It's mini, but it packs huge punch when it comes to producing music. My recent track, Giant V, or I don't know if it's even V, the French word, that track entirely produced on Roland SEO2, and also the track On the Edge. It sounds great. I'll play it for you. It's just a little bit in a bit. But if you guys want to start with like a small size analog synthesizer, definitely recommend looking into either this one, which is the Roland SEO2, or you guys can look into something called anything to do with the Roland Boutique, like the package. So there is Juno 6, I think there's one, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah, there's the Juno 6, and then there is also two other one. I think there's one called SH1. But there's a couple of them. Those are like very cheap to get. So if you want to, please do so. And
one thing I think that is really important about looking at when you're buying an analog synth.
You're getting a little bit choppy there, Andy.
Upper ceiling for pricing on these things is like you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars, right? But if you're looking at something more entry level, something more, a little bit more accessible, spend your money on something that is not a digital. I believe, for example, like the Roland 303, the Boutique, from the same product line as the SEO2. Although there are analog components within that unit, basically what it does is it plays with samples. It plays with samples that are taken from the original analog synthesizer. So basically, if you're purchasing something like that, what you're getting is not that much different from the soft synth that you already have on your computer. Because again, it's not reproduced components, but the raw sample is digital. So it's really not that different. You could probably achieve the same effect using exactly the software that you probably already have on your computer. So what I would recommend if you're looking at something like that is get something affordable. But one of the reasons why the SEO2 is so great is because it's analog through and through. Like the bass sound is not digital. It's recreating the sound immediately in front of you from scratch using analog components. And because of that, I think it's one of the best values for money in the starter synth market, because there is no VST that has been made to replicate it, right? For example, like in the Arturia synth packs, you know, you have digital replications of many famous digital, you know, large synthesizers like Jupiters and Junos and Moogs and things of that nature. So, but there's nothing for the SEO2, which is a good thing, and it means that if you're spending your money on it, it's not something that you could have reproduced with a VST otherwise. So it's great value.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the biggest reason I actually ended up buying this because Andy bought it first, and the reason I ended up buying it afterwards because it doesn't have a software synth. So basically, no one can really replicate the sound of this in a software level. So they won't be coming up with like a preset pack saying, "Oh, this is, you know, silent SEO2 pack" or something like that. That's like my biggest reason of moving into analog sounds, by the way, is because you come up with sounds that's only yours because you're basically tweaking this actual synthesizer to come up with your own sound. I feel like that's the biggest thing right now the entire music industry needs, is that music producers coming up with their unique sound rather than just going to silent or going to, you know, Serum or going to Massive and just open up a preset and just play like anything on your keyboard and that's it, you got a new track. But even though your track might be great, but just because someone else already produced something extraordinary like that, already it's out there in the market, you will not going to put a dent on the industry as your brand. So it's very important to like have your own sound. It could be a very unique drum groove. It could be a very unique synth sound. It's really up to you. All right, so I'm moving on then. I'm not going to touch too much base because I'm still actually working on this. So this is the clone of 303 from Behringer. Good thing about this one is that it's analog versus the clone that Roland did it, which is basically a digital imprint. So this is actually analog, and I'm still learning it.
Todd, we're looking at you right now, not the
Yeah.
thing.
So I'm gonna switch that right now. So
Yeah.
this is the Behringer 303 right now. So still learning it. The sequence is great. Only thing about the sequence is that I'm still trying to understand, making sure the actual sequence matches with the BPM and everything. So once I figure that out, I'll be playing or making like a studio session here on Twitch or maybe on Facebook with just this particular synth. And then I have this one. This is more of just a controller to make my life easier. So I thought about getting like a proper automatic fader controller like last year, because I'll like more and more I'm getting into music production, and more I spend more time on producing music. I realized that when I'm using just mouse to do automation, it just limits me a lot when it comes to doing a couple of things on the fly. So for example, if I want to do like a reverb send plus doing a cutoff automation on like say Silent or Diva or say even an analog synthesizer, I can only do one at a time with a mouse, versus with a controller I can do everything at the same time by just directing all these encoders to each signals. So this is basically a Panorama P1 that I use for all the controlling, and I also use this for some mix downs time to time because the faders are pretty much acts almost similar to automatic faders, but it's not automatic, but it's really great. And then I have this, still learning. This is Moog Grandmother. Got this what 2 weeks now. Another reason I got this over the Moog Sub 37, a lot of my fans were actually asking me about why didn't I get the Sub 37, is because Sub 37 is similar to putting a preset, because Sub 37 comes with all the presets and you can just be completely lazy and just load up a preset and it's just making sound like absolutely amazing. I wanted to do a bit differently. So every single sound that will come up with this is produced by me or created by me, because it's completely modular or semi-modular, and it's completely analog. So everything I do, it doesn't save any patch because it's all rotary knobs and everything when it comes to oscillators. So whatever or the way I would leave it, it will stay exactly like that next day. Versus say the Roland ACO2, which has preset options. So I can just go and load up a preset and it will sound like that preset rather than what it's there with these rotors. So that's a little bit of my studio. I hope you guys got some information out there. And those of you who are tuned in, if you guys want to get into music productions, or if you're a budding music producer, definitely recommend start with mastering the software, which is the DAW first, rather than getting overwhelmed seeing all these analog synthesizers. Because when I first started, I did not care about any of the analog synthesizers or anything. First thing for me was basically understanding and learning the DAW and learning the softwares and soft synths. So next, I want to talk to you guys about, yeah?
I said, show us how to use some of them.
Yeah, I will. And next I'm going to talk to you guys about is, which was the main reason of doing this studio session, is a couple of the production tips and tricks. Now, the production tips and tricks, I feel like when I first started, my biggest struggle was to nail the sound of the kick and the bass together. That's the first struggle. And then the second struggle was making sure everything else talked to each other throughout the mix. Now, one biggest problem, not in any particular genre of music, but certain genres do stand out when it comes to this problem, is that there's always an issue with templates. Like you buy a template and you just slap blocks and blocks and blocks, and then you just name it your track. But there's no true feelings behind those tracks. There's like no soul to it. Like you just sound, you just hear like any other 10 tracks you heard on your promo inbox from anyone else. So in order for you to stand out, to be something different, first of all, avoid templates at any cost. If it takes you like extra 2 months to learn how an arrangement works, learn that, please. If it takes you extra 2 months to learn how a track is properly made from start till finish, take that time. One quick tip about production or getting like a proper arrangement is, if you know a track that you're referencing to, whatever DAW you're using, on that DAW, just put that track in. This is something that was taught to me by a couple of my colleagues in the industry. Elevation is one who I actually learned a lot from. Is that just put that track that you're referencing to on your DAW. So it could be on a different BPM. If that's the case, then make sure that the BPM is aligned. So if you're referencing a track from Kygo, or say from Enrico Sangiuliano, or say from Armin van Buuren, whoever, if you place that track and just see how it's been built, like where's the intro starting up, at what bar level, there's like a little bit of a cutoff on the low end to bring back the actual sound. So that's how I learn when it comes to arrangements. Like my arrangements it's been a journey. Like I feel like last 2 years where I'm like very much confident when it comes to understanding how an arrangement works. It took me a long time to understand it well, but now I'm very, very fairly confident when it comes to
most DAWs. Most DAWs will have a function where you can, let's say if you have an audio sample, like a track that you're analyzing, you'll be able to actually write notes directly onto the timeline in front of you. So what you can do is use it as a visual representation, and then also insert notes onto.
Andy, by the way, I'm just gonna interrupt you there just a little bit. Your internet is
happening. So,
it's super choppy, your internet.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna duck out then, and I'm gonna see if I can figure it out.
Okay. Yeah, fix that and come back. Okay. So what I was saying is, when it comes to the arrangement, it's very, very important to learn that. So I'm going to share all of that today for you guys. So I'm going to share how the arrangement works. I'm going to share how to tune a kick and a bass. And there's one big secret I'm going to share with you guys. This is not any money-making secret that I'm going to ask you to link something else to buy something. This is completely free. And I'll be doing this almost quite often now to share you guys all these tips and tricks to actually nail that sound and find that like true sound of yours. Biggest problem that I find is the stereo spectrum, and even I didn't knew about this for a very long time, is that when you're producing a track, it has to be produced such a way that it's not sounding like this. So if I'm saying this as a stereo spectrum, it has to be like this rather than this. That's why it sounds like very hollow, or it might not sound very full. So your stereo spectrum is almost, think of like a circle, like a half circle. That's your entire stereo spectrum. And your kick sits right in the middle. Your bass sits right in the middle. And a lot of the elements also actually sits right in the middle on certain frequencies, and then it kind of spreads out. It doesn't spread out frantically, like it's not everywhere all over the place. So I'm going to be showing that to you guys as well. So let's start with the kick and the bass. So I'm going to start with that first, and then I'm going to share with you guys how I tune it and how I prefer saturation over compression for a lot of the reason. But there's other reason I do use compression a lot. And then obviously I'm going to be doing the stereo imaging. And at the very end, I will leave you guys, give you guys the mic to like ask me any question if you guys have in terms of your production, not just these topics for today. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so you guys can see me well and see the screen well? Yeah. And you guys can hear me well as well? Okay, perfect. And if you guys can hear the audio, give us a thumbs up. All right, so this is a project I'm actually working with Elevation, who used to be my biggest mentor. He's a great friend of mine. And now we are actually working with each other on different projects. I help him out on his projects. He helps me out on my projects, and time to time, just because I switched to techno or melodic techno a lot, that doesn't really mean that, you know, I stopped talking to all my colleagues from the trance scene. We still talk, we still do work. So he remixed my track with Christina Soto called The Island, which is going to be part of my compilation that's coming up very soon. I don't know, did we decide a time yet for that, Adam, for the compilation? No, okay. So, but yeah, we have a compilation coming out, which we're gonna be doing, and that actually going to feature this remix on there. And then it's also going to get a full release as well. So the way how I work when it comes to production for VRTN, not my own productions, is that I just don't expect you to send me a track and then I will just sign it. I'm going to work with you and make sure that track sounds well and ready to release for anywhere. So for example, Elevation is a really big name when it comes to the trance scene, but just to make sure that I am satisfied with the mix downs, I actually asked him to send me the session so that I can do the final mix down of the track so that I know how it sounds for me and how it sounds for the label as a whole. So if you're sending me a track thinking that, oh, my track sounds really bad in terms of mix down, I'm sure once Andy joins back, he will echo the same way. What I'm going to say now is that we're not asking you to like make it like the perfect track for us to send it to send a demo to. If you have like a particular parts of your track that we can hear and has the potential, we will go back and forth with you and make it like a bigger track and a better track. So a good example of that is Mandy or Amanda. When I first met her online, she sent me her tracks. And even though the track was not perfect on any way whatsoever, but there were certain places or certain elements of that track was great. And it was so good for me that I actually wanted to make a collaboration of that track, which I'm actually working on a track with her right now. Same thing would happen for a lot of other artists if you guys reach out to us as well, is that if you have a track, even if it's the very start of the track, or if you're just starting up as a producer, but if we can hear something on that particular track that has potential to be something big, we will help you throughout the process. And at the very end, obviously, we will kind of ask you to send us like the stems so that we can do the mix down and even master. If I'm not doing the master myself, we have a distributor who does our distribution. They also does mastering for us as well, which is Labelworks. So let's go back into the screen here. If you guys want to zoom in, by the way, if you guys don't see it properly, you can actually zoom in through your Zoom meeting. For those of you who are using Zoom, and those of you who are not using Zoom through Twitch, you can just full screen it and you'll be able to see much clearly. So I'm just gonna play a quick clip of this track first, see how it sounds, and then we're gonna discuss a couple of these things here.
Everybody here is the same deep down. Yeah, want a little break from the weight of now. Yeah, I know. Oh, don't you know? Strong bodies moving in the heat of sun. My pulse will find a way through everyone. Don't you know?
right, so pretty great track. I'm actually very excited to actually play this on my sets very soon as well. The biggest thing I did very first when he sent me this track, like just the demo, there's a couple of things that I heard was like not up to the point or on par, which was first the kick. In this particular track, I'm just gonna make sure the parts are properly aligned. So let me just go ahead and right here. Okay, so this one is the bass and the kick. So they're all going together side by side, and the kick wasn't cutting through the mix. So for this particular kick, he actually used my own track of the original because I sent him a couple of the parts to remix it. And the kick already was a little bit processed. However, I'm just gonna turn off what I processed. So if you hear the kick now, so this is already a little bit processed kick. However, it wasn't sounding quite there yet with the whole track because he used a pad bass for this particular track rather than like a rolling bass or rather than sequential bass. And the pad bass that he used was actually his Moog Sub 37, which is like an analog sound. So it was very overpowering and it wasn't making the kick kind of cut through in the mix. So first thing what I do, not just this particular track, for any track, even if I'm producing a new track, is I make sure that kick on certain frequencies is mono. So I use this particular plugin called Brainworks 2098 EQ. You can use any other plugin out there, by the way. It's not necessarily that you have to use this plugin. I'm a very big fan of Plugin Alliance. Their stuff probably are the only thing I use now. I used to have all the Waves file. I deleted all my Waves plugins and got this because every single plugin that I get from Brainworks or Plugin Alliance are absolutely amazing. Their customer service is amazing. They have a group on Facebook that you can actually go and share ideas and share different thoughts and process as well when it comes to like any kind of music productions or any kind of plugins with them. And a lot of the big names are there on that group as well. So big shout out to Plugin Alliance because they send me a lot of free stuff too. But at the same time, they're great. This particular plugin has an option called Mono Maker, which allows you to do make mono on certain frequencies. So if you can see right here, this one's called the Mono Maker, and it allows you to mono make only on certain frequencies. So on the kick, first thing I do is make sure it's mono around 90 hertz. Sometimes I do based on the kick, how it sounds. Some kick I do about 65 hertz. Some I do like about 90. So for this particular one, I did about 90 hertz or 100 hertz, about that much. And then I don't really use the Logic stock EQ, which I turned it off here because that's what Elevation used on his project, but it didn't sound quite well. So let me show you if I turn this on and how it sounds and if I turn it off. So this is with the EQ that he did, and this is without. And this is how it sounds with the whole track together. So it's there, but it still felt like it wasn't cutting through quite enough. So for me, I thought the way I processed the kick before was good enough for me. So all I did, making sure that it's mono on certain frequencies. So I turned it on. So it's basically mono for about 90 hertz. And then I kind of boosted a little bit of the low frequencies, which is around 60 hertz, about 3 dB. A good thing about this particular plugin, it allows me to only gain on certain threshold. For example, it allows me to gain only about 9 is the maximum cutoff point for the dB section. And then I used a little bit of high frequency. I turned it down a little bit because it sounded way too bright for me. So for example, if I listen to the tick again, so see, when I play it now, you can hear the difference. So if I play without, it sounds like this. If I play with, you can hear the low and starts to boom up a little bit. And you can also hear the actual higher frequency or the spark on the bottom end, and also on the high frequencies that are a little bit low, because I turned the high frequencies down a little bit. So this is a little bit sparkly, and this is without the spark. And this is just my personal choice, by the way. And remember, like when it comes to producing music, these are just a set of rules for me. This is not a set of rules universal. These are not set of rules for you or anyone who's like listening or watching this. This is me, how it sounds for me on audibly. So it sounds great. It can be subjective. Some people prefers that high frequency sparkle. Others prefer a little bit darker. So for me, most of my elements and like the music event itself is I prefer a little bit darker rather than higher frequency. So that's what I did only when it comes to EQ for the kick. Just a little bit of high frequency gain down on about -3 dB. A little bit of gain boost on low frequency at 60 hertz. And the high frequency was about 11,000 hertz, by the way. And I also use filters for this kick. So the filter, what it does, it basically filters out the extra rumble. So human ears plus a lot of the speakers that we normally use, you don't even really notice the low frequency, anything below 60 hertz. But when you're playing this track in a festival or when you're playing this track in a club settings, they do build up a lot of low frequencies, anything below 60 hertz. Now, you don't really need that much. So I sometimes use a little bit of a filter, which is basically a cutoff filter or like a low cut filter that I have on this particular EQ. And I did that for about 25, 26 hertz, so that there's not extra rumble when you are playing that track in a club or you're playing that track in a festival. So once again, that's all I did for the EQ. No stereo whatsoever. Please make sure your kick sits right in the middle of your stereo spectrum. And what I mean by that, I'm going to show that to you right now. Let me just use... So this is basically a stereo spectrum. So what this does is it's just a same plugin that I'm using from Plugin Lines, but you can use any stereo spectrum plugin. You can find that on any DAW actually has a built-in one as well. So Ableton has a stereo, Logic has one as well. But I use this one because it actually gives you a little bit of a visual idea of what's going on. So if I play just the kick. So you can see the kick is literally right in the middle. And the main focus of this kick is right at the bottom of the frequency. And it's not really spreading anything on the left or right. So that's what I mean by when it comes to having a kick that should cut through in your mix, is it has to sit right in the middle. It cannot be spread out in your stereo spectrum. If it does, that will make your kick muddy. And that will make your kick sound boxy. So it's very important that you make sure that your kick doesn't sound boxy and it doesn't sound muddy. Make sure there's no stereo, and make sure one quick tip is that make sure your kick, I'm just going to use the visual one. Make sure your kick is not boosted around the 300 hertz, because that's where the actual kick kind of starts sounding boxy. So sometimes when I'm doing a bit of a mix down for a lot of people, I do tend to see that their kick sounds very boxy or muddy, or even the bass sounds very boxy or muddy, is because the actual stereo spectrum or the actual frequency on that kick has a little bit of boost on that 130 to 300 hertz. Now, if you have a FAF filter EQ, you can use this, or you can just use any spectrum EQ to like EQ out that particular frequency level. So the Pro EQ3 actually has a preset that I really love. It's called Mix, and then it says right here that says mud removal. So it's dynamic, then mix, then mud removal. That will allow you to kind of like understand where you are getting the muddiness, and you can just use that to kind of lower down the muddiness on your spectrum. So for example, right here, it will kind of lower down your mud removal for 130 hertz, or you can go 200 hertz, or you can go 300 hertz, depending on where exactly you're getting the mud. So just a quick tip when it comes to the actual kick and also the bass line. Now let's go to the bass.
Saad, what might they be able to do if they don't have all these expensive plugins?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning. I think you missed it in between. So I said that they can really use any plugin when it comes to DAW, like any kind of DAW. So for example, I know Amanda, Andy, also Mahmoud, they all use Ableton. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch to Ableton because I use Ableton as well. So I'm going to switch to Ableton. I'll show you guys some tips and tricks on Ableton as well. But my go-to is Logic. It just gives me a lot more visual representation on everything that I do in a very quick fashion rather than Ableton. But I know Andy disagree with that because he thinks Logic is very like a rocket science for him, but it's fine. So for Logic users, if there are anyone out there for Twitch or YouTube or anyone else, there's a lot of stock plugins that you can find on Logic. So for example, if you click on the plugin right here, it gives you everything. And to be honest with you, there are a few things that I still use just stock plugins because they are so good. So for example, if you want to make sure your kick is just mono or it's not spreading on the stereo, you can go right here where it says imaging and the direction mixer. So the direction mixer basically will allow you to not have enough spread. So let me just make it a bit bigger so that you can see it better. So this is basically the stereo spread from Logic. And what it's doing right now, it's showing you that it has about 100% stereo spread. And it's giving you where exactly it's the stereo spread's going. So 200 hertz. So if you want to make sure that it's only mono and it's right in the middle, all you have to do is just turn it down. That's all we do. And it makes the sound way more fatter for the low end. So always remember when it comes to producing music, anything that would have anything like mid, low frequency and sub, it should be sitting on the, it should be sitting on the center. Then slowly you spread it out a little bit. So for example, if I'm using ACO2 or if I'm using the Moog Grandmother for a pluck sound or a lead sound, I definitely don't want to put too much low end on that because that will make my entire mix muddy. So what you want to do is that you kind of EQ. So when I use like a pluck sound, for example, what I will do is I will EQ out up to 100 hertz, actually, like literally almost sometimes even 150, but about 100 hertz. And then from there, I'm going to start cutting out the frequency that I don't want. So here's one thing I want to mention again, and this is like a personal preference, but it's also very crucial you understand that this could be a little bit of a studio error, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. I could be wrong. Is that do not boost EQ. I hate that because I feel like you should always focus on cutting frequencies in elements rather than boosting frequencies, because boosting frequencies on each element builds up on your entire track. So for example, if I use just this as a good example, just the kick, and I'm just going to turn off everything what I have on the master channel. And if I play it, and if I start boosting this, you can see it's already clipping right here. That means that your track already had a 7 dB gain just because you boosted your frequencies on every different spectrum of your element. So I'm very against boosting frequencies. I am more in the favor of cutting frequencies down and then work on frequencies that matters to you and start compressing them or start saturating them. Now, I am more a person who likes to prefer doing saturation more than compression, but this is just my own tips and tricks. I'm pretty sure other artists, other producers, they do differently. So I prefer doing saturation over compression for multiple reasons. So I'm going to show that to you with the bass. So let's find out.
Really quickly, if you're using Ableton and you wanted to do the same thing that Saad just showed us, you'd be using the utility plugin.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna share that with you guys in a bit. I know you guys use Ableton. So what he did, Michael or Mike, aka Elevation, that he used a pad bass for this track. So instead of using like a pattern bass or using like a rolling bass, he used a pad bass, which is technically also a lead in a sense as well. So I'm just gonna play that for you guys right now. So great pad. It sounds like growling monster out there. It's from Moog. But again, you can easily achieve this sound with Serum, by the way. You can easily achieve the same sound with Silent. There's a couple of even factory presets out there. You just have to tweak the filter cutoff, and you should be able to actually achieve that kind of sound. Now, with this particular bass, if I turn everything off, what I did when he sent me this particular track is he already did the bounce for me since he used the analog synth, and he did a little bit of EQ. But when he did that, it actually overpowers the entire track. If I play this with the whole track, it sounds like this. So completely non-existent bass, like the bass is completely gone because the way how it was produced. So in order for me to like do it properly, first thing what I did is I turned off the actual EQ on the higher frequency because I just need the lower part of the frequency, because we can add any top layer or any kind of like top line on the bass afterwards. First, it's always you want to nail the kick and the bass, and then you kind of start adding other elements. That's one way of doing it. Or you can start with just the drums and then add bass afterwards. It's really up to you. But first thing what I did is I did a little bit of EQ. This is without the EQ. This is with the EQ. I turned on all the harshness. I turned all the EQ out on the higher frequency. But it's only acts as a sub/low frequency. Then what I did is I added a little bit of saturation on top of it. So when I added a saturation, I used this something called fat filter. And it's the fat filter Saturn. Now, you guys can use any saturator. There's a lot of saturation out there. The reason why I use this is because this is almost like it's like a saturator. It's also a multi-band saturation. It has its own EQ. It has its own delay modulation. It has its own distortion. It has a lot of things together. And a lot of my colleagues uses this. I feel like almost any producers out there uses this for a saturation. So I have a couple of presets that I pretty much collected in last 2-3 years using this particular filter. And basically what this preset that I use is called Tighten Up. Basically it tightens the lower end frequency, and it kind of allows you to control each frequency on different bands. So for example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bands here. I didn't want any kind of crazy rumble on very, very bottom of the frequency, like how I mentioned to you guys earlier, the 40 hertz and below. So I turned that band completely down in terms of the actual level. So it's down. And then I used band 2 to push the frequency a little bit up. So this is for anything between 40 hertz to 90 hertz, which allows you to kind of add another 3 or 4 decibel of frequency that I did for this particular bass. Then the boxiness comes in. So again, trying to remind you guys how you can have a lot of muddiness. That's where I lower down the frequency. So from anything 931 going up to 400 or almost 500 hertz, I lowered the band level down because I didn't want it to have any kind of muddiness coming into it. So this one is just 0 dB. So there's basically no processing or anything whatsoever on this particular band. Then I used the band 3, which is the crossover frequency, we call it. Anything from 500 going all the way up to about 10,000. I added a little bit more extra crunch, so another 3 dB or 3.5 dB, and then making sure there's no any additional harshness. So I lowered down anything from 10,000 and below. I mean, and up, because since this is being used just as a sub or low frequency bass. So if I turn that on with the EQ that I did, it sounds like this. As you can hear, that particular note that goes really low, it sounds way too low for me when I hear it. I don't know if you guys can hear that. So for that, what I did make sure that particular low, like last note, or I think the third note, when it hits, it doesn't cause too much rumbling on the low end, especially in this entire stereo spectrum. So for that reason, I brought back up that EQ that I use, basically, which is again a mono maker. So I added extra mono up to 150 hertz. And then I added a little bit of dip on the high frequency again. This particular EQ, it's not an active EQ, it's a passive EQ. So even if I turn it down to like 18 dB, you can still hear certain frequencies like coming out from that band or high frequency level. But I still turned it down, making sure nothing is going through in the high frequency or the high mid frequency. So I turned both of them down, and then I boosted a little bit on the 300 frequency band and also on the 60 band, just add a little bit more rumble so that both of them kind of glues through like the kick and the bass. Now it's still not there yet, by the way. So if I play kick and the bass together, you can hear it's not quite there yet. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys the kick and the bass sounds as if the bass is overpowering and the kick sounds a little bit underwhelming. So that's where I started adding a compression. Now the compression for this particular track, I added first, and then I moved the EQing like afterwards, because I just wanted it to kind of push through on the track rather than, you know, have all the EQ down and then do the compression. Because technically for me, that particular kick was already processed by me. So I know that it's already shining through on this track in terms of the vocals. So for that reason, I just wanted to make sure the actual kick is kind of compressed in terms of the entire track. So I added something called Shadow Hail, but you don't need to use Shadow Hail. You can use anything. Shadow Hail is a mastering compressor, but it has some preset that actually makes the tracks sound like really, really fat. And so I use this particular preset called discrete heavy low ratio. So it's basically more a discrete gain. I'm not going to get into too details because it gets too technical for you guys. But if I turn it on, this is how it sounds like with just the kick. So it sounds very balanced now. If I turn it off, it sounds a low. It sounds a low and it's a lot more rather than that apart. So if I turn it on, it sounds everything is pretty like balanced. So that was the main reason. I think someone's mic is I can hear double. Oops. Okay, there you go. So normally for this particular track, if it's not balanced, if the low end sounds too heavy, then what you have to do is you need to cut down the bass. But we don't want that because this bass sounds so well. We want the bass to shine through. So for that reason, we lower down the actual low frequencies of this kick. So that's why adding a little bit of compression with some EQ and some filter added, it sounds more balanced. So if I play both of them together now, this is how it sounds. So the kick and the bass almost there, but I still believe there's a little bit of work needs to be done. And that's where I'm going to go back and do some more work on the actual bass. Now, if you can hear it, when the kick hits, so the bass is kind of clashing when the kick hits. So that's where we need to fix. And it's very simple. I'm sure most of you, those of you who are starting up, also probably know this, which is side chaining. So we use a little bit of side chaining to make sure that there's a space when the kick hits, the bass ducks down. So that's basically what we do. And I use something called Kickstart. I also sometimes use X4 LFO tool. Both of them are fairly cheap, I think. I think this one is $20 and the LFO tool, I think, is probably $50. Both has its own pros and cons. This one, if I want to do a very quick sidechain, this is the one I use. It's by Nicky Romero, if you guys know Nicky Romero. But the other one is called the X4 LFO. And that looks like something like this. This one is done by Steve Duda, which is the studio engineer with deadmau5. This one, the new version actually automatically starts with the sidechain, but they have presets where you can actually go and select any of the sidechain you want to do. But those things I'm going to talk to you guys maybe one day later. For now, I'm just going to show you that what I exactly did when it comes to the bass. So I'm just going to play the bass again without the sidechain. So you can still hear there's a little bit of click. That click is coming from when Mike sent me the stems, he already had a little bit of sidechaining done. But when we processed the kick with it, it still felt like it wasn't enough. So for that reason, we added a little bit of sidechaining, which is basically the kickstart. So I'm going to play it one more time because I think we had the LFO tool playing the sidechain. So I'm going to play it again. But you can still hear a little bit from there. But it wasn't actually giving you that space to kind of cut through the actual kick when the bass is being played. So for that reason, I use this particular preset or the plugin called Nicky Romero Kickstart, which is basically a sidechain preset / plugin. Now, if you don't want to spend money and you just want to use the stock ones, Ableton, Andy, does Ableton has a stock preset for sidechaining?
I don't know if it's a preset, but the stock Ableton compressor, if you expand it, has an option for sidechaining. And generally what people will do is they'll duplicate their kick track, and one of them they'll mute, and then they'll send the signal from that ghost kick to their to the stock compressor that's on another channel, and use that muted kick that you don't actually hear on the master channel, but they'll use it just to send the signal to the other channels to duck out of the way.
Yeah. So I don't know, Amanda and Mahmoud, if you guys are aware of that. So if you want to use the sidechain, you can just use that from the compression. But for make your life very easy, I would definitely recommend looking into getting one of these. It's super easy. So let's go back, and if I play it, this is how it looks like. So if I play I didn't really use a lot of sidechain. That's like, I feel like that's one of the biggest mistake a lot of newcomer artists, including myself, I actually made that mistake too when I first started, is that you overdo the side chaining. Like if you do too much side chain, it would sound like it's hitting the wall every single time. It sounds like it's like a wobble. We are not producing dubstep. Not that you cannot produce, but that's for dubstep music. That whole wobble thing. For anything that has a 4x4 spectrum, you definitely don't want to overdo the sidechain. So best suggestion would be is to like make sure you lower down the output level of your sidechain, and that's what the limitation is when it comes to using like a stock one. I mean, I'm pretty sure you can still do it as long as you can lower down the release a little bit and lower down the attack a little bit. You still might be able to have like a very less percentage of sidechaining. But with the plugins that is just built for sidechain, that actually has a built-in rotary knob that allows you to like add how much sidechain you want to add in on that particular layer. So I use just about 15% or 17% on this one. So if I wanted to not do that and make a rookie mistake, this is how it would sound like. You can hear it's just like one thing to remember, especially for this particular track, is that the bass is so heavy. You want to make sure that the kick is not low and heavy. So you just want to make sure it has that click on the kick that it cuts through it right away. So if I add that with the actual kick, this is how it sounds like. So that's basically all it is when it comes to making a kick and bass to talk to each other, making sure it's just there. And then if you're not sure if it's sounding great or not, best thing to do is just reference it with another track that is similar to what you're trying to make. For example, when I was mixing down his remix, I was listening to Ben Bomber's track because it has that feeling of that track, and wanted to make sure it sounds almost similar to what it's happening. And yeah, best suggestion is just drag and drop the track right here and just A/B. You just mute that track and just play your track and hear that track. You would know exactly right away what exactly you're making a mistake. All right. What I'm going to do is now I'm just going to, since it's an actual project that is completely finished, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share more like how I make one kick and bass talk to each other from scratch. So I'm just going to open that up. Close.
I have a question, Saad.
Yeah.
If you're going to start a new track from scratch, like where do you begin? Do you start with a melody or do you start laying down the beat? Like how do you start?
For me personally, when I used to produce trance, I used to start with pad. That's how I used to start before. Lately, I start with kick and bass, but recently I'm going back on that whole pad thing again, or just an ARP sequence, because I feel like I had like a phase for last 8 months where I just wanted to make 4x4 floor and floor techno, and I'm kind of dialing back again. It's still gonna be 4x4 banging techno, but it's gonna have a lot of melodic elements to it. So it so that it doesn't just sound like a monotonous techno track. It has a lot to it. So for me right now personally, yes, I start with a pad. I have a lot of, over the course of like last 10 months, Andy and I together collectively have collected crazy amount of samples and we go through those samples together, and then if one sample sounds great, obviously we don't want to just drag that sample from here and then just drop it. We kind of like, then from that as an inspiration or idea, we build a track around it, either whether it's just like my track, whether it's just like Andy's track, or going back and forth. So yeah. For you particularly though, Adam, since you are starting to dabble into making house music, I would definitely recommend drum patterns, because house music's core, or techno, even techno actually,
Yeah.
core is the drum pattern, the
Right.
groove. Because if your groove talk to each other, then you can add any other elements on top of it very easily.
Right.
That's why, like, now I'm getting a little bit comfortable with the drum patterns. That's why I'm trying to challenge myself, not start with drums.
Yeah.
I start with something else, because if I don't, what happens is every other track gets the same drums, which Andy kind of give me a check sometime, and he's like, "Oh, it's that same kick again." I was like, "Well, okay, so maybe we should do something else then." So
yeah, nice.
Yeah.
There's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but if you're, you know how like in a track, there's certain elements or certain sounds that will pique your ear that immediately make you associate those sounds with that particular track.
Yeah.
If you're using those kinds of sounds over and over again, like for example, Saad's track Heart Attack, there's like a particular like sort of digital bleep sound that is particular to that track and sort of, you know, is a calling card of that particular track. And he was, you know, using some elements of that track to build another one, because that's also obviously a very useful production technique. If you're basically using your own tracks as inspiration for new ones, which is a good thing. But depending on what kinds of sounds you're carrying over, a listener can pick up on that and makes it seem derivative. You know what I mean? Like you're just sort of recycling project files, which is not actually what you're doing. So sometimes when you do that, you have to be careful.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like a double-edged sword when it comes to the whole using your own sound and like doing another project, because sometimes you might get opportunities, which I did, by the way. After releasing Heart Attack, I was approached by this Argentinian record label to remix one of this really known melodic techno producer, and they particularly wanted me to make sure that it sounds like Heart Attack. Like the actual flesh of the track has to sound like Heart Attack, or else they won't sign it. So I was like, okay, here we go. Copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, and it's done. So, but I mean, that's just their personal choice, and I do not disagree with any of that. Like if they want that sound, I can easily give that. It's totally okay. But for like people who are starting up, like since it's like I'm like almost like deep down in my career, so it's very important to stand out on every single track that I produce. But for the newcomers, I definitely would recommend start building up your sound in the sense, have like a vision, what you want to do. So vision in the sense you're going to produce 5 tracks in 5 months. Each track, you're going to spend a month. Not more than that, not less than that. If you spend more time, that means you're wasting your time. That's what I first started, by the way. So when I first started producing music, I produced 1 track every month, and then I tweaked it for the entire month to understand what's my flaw and how it works. Then more and more as my career progressed, the time span shortened up. Like now I produce, if I want, I can produce a track a day, but that doesn't mean it could be quality over quantity or quantity over quality. It's again, subjective. But for the newcomers, start with 5 tracks for 5 months, and then 1 track, you work on it, and don't work on it too much. I was telling this to Mandy, because she was working on this track for so much that she was going crazy. And then I was telling her, don't work on a track for too much that you get ear fatigue. And you might be hearing sound that might sound great, but when you share it with someone, it sounds awful, or it sounds very, very harsh. So work on a track for a day. If you work for 10 hours, that should be your cutoff point, because after 10 hours, your ear starts to get tired. Even not 10 hours, sometimes 8 hours. Then don't work on that track next day right away. Give like a break. Maybe go play PlayStation, or like go for a run or something, or listen to other music. Actually, sometimes that's what I do, is that I work on a track and then I completely don't listen to it for a couple of days and listen to like other people's music that is similar to mine for like at least good 1 day or 2, sometimes even on different speakers too, not just my studio speakers. So I would listen to maybe a couple of tracks or a set in a speaker, like in my studio speaker, then I will move into my living room and listen to on my Google Home speakers, because you have to understand that your sound is not just meant for your studio speakers, which sounds fantastic. It's 80% or 90% of the people who listens to you or listening to you is listening using iPhone earbuds and TV speakers, which are very mono. They don't even hear the small details of it. All they hear is the lead sound, your pluck, your bass, and the drop. That's it. So it's very important. Spend less time, but make it effective. So each day, like give a break, or else you will get frustrated, and then you won't be able to finish a project. So this is my suggestion to you guys: 5 tracks for like 5 months. How about that as a challenge? 5 months challenge. Okay.
And if you have old project files, even if you're new, it doesn't matter how new you are. Like you might have started producing yesterday, but if you have old project files, an easy way to develop what you might come to call your sound is to go through your old project files and drag all of the samples and the presets that you like the most into a separate folder. So although you might have, like Saad and I have probably close to 100 gigabytes of samples, or maybe even more. But that doesn't mean we're going to look through 100 gigabytes of samples every time we start a new track. So what you might do is you might start building a sub library of just the favorite stuff that you've already used, that you know how to manipulate, that you know sounds good in a mix, that you know works. And then every time you start a new project file, unless you need new sounds, you can just draw from that. So it saves you so much production time.
I 100% agree on that, actually. I think I do that now quite a bit. I actually went back to my very first track I never released and never finished. And I took a couple of the MIDI files and a couple of the samples from that I'm actually going to be working on a track for the album that I'm working on for next year. But yeah, I think that's a great idea and a great advice. Okay, so let's jump right into the kick and the bass process. So I'm going to use a sample and I'm going to use a synthesizer so that you guys understand both how I do it. I don't really use like a kick synth anymore because I just prefer to use samples, and then I tweak the samples to the point that it sounds great. I don't know in trance scene, but I know it's a big thing in the techno scene, including some big names. What they do, they even sample just the kick, because you can sample, I think, up to 5 seconds of any track without getting any kind of copyright. I don't know if it's, Adam probably knows it. Is it 5 seconds or 30 seconds for samples clearance? Your mic is muted.
Sorry, 5 seconds or 30 seconds for what?
Sample clearance. Like how much can you have like a sample, then you can get away with it? Like 5 seconds, I think
it's 30.
30?
I'm honestly not 100% sure when it comes to the legalities of it. I think really we should be looking to clear any sample that we use just to avoid any potential problems. Especially if something like takes off. I could see, if a track really blows up and starts getting radio play and stuff like that, if we hadn't cleared a sample, we might find ourselves in trouble, versus if the track never, didn't get too big, we could probably get away with it. So I think we should always be looking to clear, but I think there is something about the length and using shorter lengths where you don't need to necessarily clear. I'm just not sure what the exact rules are.
Yeah, I think when it comes to sample, like if you're sampling like an actual song, you're definitely gonna get flagged. So for example, like Beautiful People, the track, when I produced it, I actually sampled Marilyn Manson's Beautiful People, because the acapella is all over the internet. So I was like, oh, this could be a great techno track. And after finishing it, it was sounding great. Then Adam was like, no, we're not releasing this because it has Marilyn Manson's sample and we cannot use that because it's going to get flagged. But then I kind of like researched on it, and then you can do is if you can re-record it with your own voice of that particular hook only, you can use that. That would not gonna get flagged because you're not really copying the entire chorus and verse and like the entire flow of the track. It's just one word. Anyone can say the word any way whatsoever. So for that reason, I think that's easier to do.
Yeah, I think the key is that it's an original recording. Like we didn't use their recording. We made it right?
Yeah.
So it's not as cut and dry. If they did want to come after us for it, that I don't think they really can, because it's like we can just say, yeah, sure, we were inspired, but we re-recorded, we made our own, we did it our own way.
Yeah.
It's that simple. We did not steal the sample.
Definitely, I agree. No, absolutely. So when it comes to sampling, however, kick or sampling like a clap sound or sampling a hi-hat, which is less than a second, by the way. And those ones you can sample. And even some of the biggest names, they sample too. Like, so a kick sampling out and then like playing it on a track, it's a lot more process than you think. Like, oh, I can just sample sample and copy paste it on my studio project and it will sound great. No, because that particular sample is already post-processed and mastered, while as your track is not mastered on any sense whatsoever. So it's a lot more difficult process than having a kick synth or having a sample pack, because sample packs are normally unmastered. So let's get into it. So if I use a kick synthesizer, you can use anything stock, by the way. There's quite a bit of stock plugins out there. For example, for Logic, there is Drumbeat or Ultrabeat, which is a drum synth you can use. For Ableton, I'm sure there's same thing, like a drum synthesizer is there, right, Andy?
Sorry, what?
is there like a drum synth on Ableton that you can use, like a stock plugin?
Like where you drag in a sample and then use your keyboard to create a groove or whatever?
That's a simpler, but like it's literally just a drum. Like you can just
there's a drum rack.
Okay, yeah,
there's a drum rack.
Yeah, okay, so I'm just gonna quickly show you what I do when it comes to a drum synthesizer. So first of all, if I'm using a synthesizer, I make sure the kick is in mono, definitely not in stereo. So I have this thing called Kick 2 from Sonic Academy. So if I open it, I will select mono. This is how it looks like. It's basically a kick. So it comes with lots of built-in kick in it. So if you go on the preset, they have analog, they have bass, they have house, all this crazy kick. So let's just here. My synthesizers are unplugged, so I'm gonna plug it in. Okay,
so Saad, do you think it's important to have the entire kick in mono from the top of the frequency spectrum to the bottom, or do you think people should only be sending, let's say, their low mid and their low and their sub to a mono maker instead?
So that's what I was going to tell you. So when it comes to actual like making a kick on the synthesizer, it will become 3 layers. So first layer will be mono, which is your low end. Actually not 3 layer, 2 layers. So first layer is going to be mono, which is your low end. So anything below 100 hertz, it has to be mono. And then you have the top end, which I call a click. Now you can use a click for pretty much anything. So you can even use like a synthesizer. You can use a snare as a click. You can use a kick and then EQ it as a click. And that has to be in stereo. So you have 2 layers. So for example, I'm not sure why my synths are all unplugged. It's gonna use the piano.
So that's pretty important, because let's say if you're using Ableton or if you're using Logic and you don't set a cutoff for the mono maker, your entire kick, like even the high end sort of click transient, is going to be mono as well, and then your mix is going to sound really narrow.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly what would happen. Just give me a quick second. Let me disconnect my. Everything is disconnected here. There you go. All right, so this is the default kick. So I'm just gonna use the default for now, because then you can go all creative and make it all sounding the way how you want to sound it. So this particular synth, if you guys don't have it, do you guys, anyone of you have this synthesizer or the kick drum synthesizer? No? Okay. If you don't have it, that's totally fine. But this one actually, you can keep it on stereo because it comes with the clicks, and you can actually layer it. So there's like 3 clicks. You can have it on the right side, and then you can decide how to sound. So for example, I'm like gonna turn it down a little bit. Then if I start lowering on that thing, you would be able to see how the kick actually sounds. So if I turn it down, so so basically based on what you want. So if I'm using a kick drum like this, I want to make sure that it cuts on the top, but it also has like a big pack punch on the low end. So that's kind of like what I would go for any like a kick for myself. And then I'm just gonna make a quick pattern so that we can play it with it. Okay. So this is basically the kick, how it would sound like. So if I want to process this, right now it sounds great, but once I start adding like a bass, it might not sound that great. So I'm gonna make a bass pattern. I have like a couple of my own created bass pattern. I think the one that I used for On the Edge, I have it somewhere here. Just gonna use that for quick, because right now, because we are like almost time constrained there too, but I can go further, it's fine. But so this is basically a very simple pattern, which I used for a lot of the time. If I use like a rolling bass line, it's just a very simple pattern, kick, and then after that it's just a 4x4 in a grid, and then kind of like similar to the sound of Anna, and that's what I call this like the Anna bass line, like the rolling bass line. So if I change that preset, because I have like a lot of this channel strips saved, which is basically got all the bass that I use, but I'm just gonna switch it up. So I'm just gonna turn this off.
You should leave it as a grand piano.
Yeah, for sure. Let's use Diva. So this is how it would sound like if I play it right now. I'm gonna turn down a couple of things here so if I want just bass, no reverb or anything, because there's like a plate reverb right now going on. So I'm just gonna find like a bass preset from here to give you a quick demonstration. But I normally use SEO2 for my bass now. I think I use Grandmother even now for my bass a little bit. Actually, I think I might be able to play the SEO2. Let's just do that. So instead of Diva, I'm gonna use SEO2 to show you guys a little bit of that too. So it's
There's some static coming through.
Is it gone? Do you hear it still?
Yeah.
Okay, it's from the synthesizer.
And now it's gone.
Yeah, because the synthesizer just turned on. So the SEO2 is basically something that I use. It's a monosynth. It's not So it like right off the box, it's basically already mono. So I barely have to do any kind of processing on it. So if I play with that one, that would sound like input. That's the microphone. So hold on, let's see. Let's try that. I think the audio routing is not bad, right? It's either right now. Hold on. Okay. Seems like the audio is not coming out. All right, I'm just gonna skip the thing for now because I think it's not properly routed. So I'm just gonna play with the Diva. So let's do that. So I have a couple of the thing that I've used here in the past. One of the preset that I really love is from the Audio Tent one. So let's just use this. So this is how it sounds like. We're gonna turn it down a little bit. So right now it's really high frequency up, so I'm gonna turn it down to maybe 36. Let's see how it sounds now. I'm gonna turn the reverb off completely. So the difference right now is that it sounds okay. In order for it to sound fatter, that's when you start adding kick and making sure the kick is tuned in properly with the bass and everything. What I normally do is I have a couple of these chains saved. And before I go through and click on the chain and show you this is how it's done, you probably would have hard time understanding it. So what I normally do is I just kind of boost a little bit of frequencies on the lower ends, like I would do here. And with that, and then I'm gonna add the kick and making sure it sounds better. Now, sometimes one thing to remember is that if your kick doesn't sound really in tune with your bass, chances are the click or the top part of your kick might actually going to have like the key change. So it could be on a different key. That's why it doesn't sound or it doesn't go well with your bass. Or if you want to, you can do either way. So you can either do like a tuning of your kick with the bass key change, or you can change the top click part of the key change with your bass. I would normally suggest to change the kick rather than the bass, because if you find a really nice sounding bass, you want to stick to that, because it's hard to actually find a bass sound rather than actually a kick sound. And I think Andy would agree to that a lot, because I gave him like a really hard time last couple of weeks of making sure his kick and bass was perfect for his EP that's coming out.
You know what was actually the issue with that is something I discovered a few days ago is if you're using a sidechain plugin like LFO Tool or Kickstart, usually like the curve of the side chain is a preset, right? But if you don't actually move that curve to match up with the tail end of your kick properly, you're gonna get overlap, and then it's gonna sound flabby because you're getting phasing issues between the low end of your kick at the end, like the tail, and the fading in of your actual bass. So that was the issue that I had. It was a pain in the ass to figure out.
Well, I'm glad you know it now. Okay, I'm gonna switch my video back to my face there. Yeah, I will do like a proper studio session with all just my analog gear one day. Not like a Zoom one, but just I'll go on Twitch and Facebook and just produce a full track with just analog synthesizers. Probably like in next couple of days. I just need to like route everything into a patch bay. So Andy, I don't know if you heard this one. Basically, I have so many inputs now that I have to use a patch bay to actually route the inputs back to audio card. Soon I have to sell my duet and get like a proper additional output, I guess, eventually, if I end up buying more analog sounds. But yeah, so going back to the kick. So if I'm using this one, so I'm just gonna quickly switch into one of my presets, or like not a preset, like a plugin chain that I normally use from over the course of years that I'm very comfortable of. So like how I said, this particular pattern that I use is called the Anna sound. So this is how it normally would sound like if I use with my actual tuned preset. Now, I normally use for that one is a silent. Just turn the cutoff off, a little bit of attack, very little bit of sustain, and less release on different oscillators. And this is how it sounds here. I'm going to turn the transpose off a little bit more. Now, as you can see, this is stereo, this is mono, but like I said, the kick definitely doesn't sound like it's like quite there yet. So what I would do is I'm going to start layering it up. So since I use the synth kick, now I'm going to use a sample because I feel like most of us are very comfortable with sample, because since some of you guys don't have an actual kick synth. So I'm just going to get a sample pack. Let's find a regular kick.
I already know which one you're gonna use.
Not that one, no. So by the way, for those of you who are like not music producer, most of our time spent are basically like this. So we just go through sample packs and spend hours finding sound for hours and hours and hours that you guys don't really see behind the scene. Oh, this is actually a good kick. This is a cool one. Okay, so I'm just gonna use this for now. I'm just gonna show you what I would do with that. So this is the particular kick. I just want to make sure that it's properly tuned. That's what I would do first. And it's on the grid. So just gonna make a quick 4x4 signature here. Let's see. There you go. That sounds good already, kind of, but we'll figure it out more. So first thing what I do is in Logic, I sometimes just copy paste. Sometimes I pack it into a folder and then kind of like loop it. That's just your personal preference. But with this particular kick, same thing I would go back and do is making sure that it has that low end and it is in mono on certain frequency. So going back to my Brainworks 2098 EQ. So I'm gonna do a mono maker up to about, let's do about 60 hertz, 65 hertz, because the kick is really deep in the low end. And then I'm going to play it. So with that being said, how I'm hearing it right now, so I can hear there's like a lot of like interference on the high frequency. It sounds almost like distortion. For some people, they might not like that. So you just kind of want to tame it down a little bit. So I'm going to lower down on the high frequency. And then it sounds a little bit boxy. So I'm going to turn down the 300 hertz part a little bit. And then when you turn down the 300 hertz, since it loses a little bit of that warmth or like a mid frequency, like the priority, so you kind of want to lower high, like turn up the low frequency just a little bit so that it compensate that like the frequency cut. So I'm just gonna play it again. Sorry. Okay, so it's right there. So that's basically what I would do. And then for this particular kick, I don't really need that click sound. And since I use this special EQ, I only made the mono maker on that particular hertz. I didn't really make mono maker for the entire track. But if you are doing it and if you don't have this particular EQ, what you have to do is you have to make 2 layers. So what I would do is I'm going to show you without this. So I'm just going to duplicate this. And then right here. So first one, what I would do is I will make sure the first one is on mono. So in Logic, you can actually turn off stereo and mono spectrum right from here. So if I click this, it's mono and this is stereo. In Ableton, you have something called utility and you can just click on mono. That will make your 1-track mono, 1-track stereo. So I'm going to use this one as a stereo and this was as mono. So this will be mono, this will be stereo. Before I even start, you will hear the phasing issues. So I'm going to start playing. So you can hear that it's already kind of like having that phasing issue right there. So what I will do is I'm just going to start making the low end mono on this one, but I'm also going to EQ it. So this is the stock EQ for Logic. For Ableton, it has the same, which is the 8-band spectrum EQ. You guys can use it. So I'm just going to cut off up to 500. So if I do that and then I play it, that's mono, that's mono, this is in stereo. Then what you would do is you want to try to kind of add both into a compression. So in Ableton, it's a little bit of a tricky, but it's still the same thing, which is basically instead of sending this 2-layer into your master channel, you want to send them into a bus channel so that you can process both of them at the same time. So what you would do is you basically would go on one. So I'm sending this both in one bus channel. So that would be bus 1. So what it does is basically instead of you controlling all the elements at the same time, you're only controlling certain elements at a time. So these two are in one bus channel. So let me show you what I mean. If I play this, and if I solo this, that means I'm only hearing the kick. And then if I turn the solo off, and if I solo just the bass, and then you would only hear the bass. But if I process the tracks, and if you want to have only kick to be processed, then you want to make sure that it's only processed through the bus channel. So that's why what we're going to do. We're going to compress a little bit and do a bit of saturation. But like I said before, I'm a big saturation fan, so I'm going to start with saturation first. So let's play the track and I'll show you what exactly how it sounds. So if I play it, and you can see on this here that how crazy the low end is going all over the place there, because it's so high, like lower spectrums are so high right now in the decibel, and also that could actually start causing you a lot of muddiness. So I'm going to dial it down a little bit. So like I said before, you're gonna turn down the band level 1. So let's play it now. What it does is it's letting you cut through the mix on both elements. So let me play it again. You can hear the bass of the element, but you can also hear the kick low end. So you don't really can distinguish between a kick low end and the sub bass low end. So that's what we're gonna do now. So I'm gonna play it again, and you can hear the difference between, or the differences, and you can hear that the mixer actually differentiating the sound of the sub bass and the kick. So you can hear the kick is coming out, and you can also hear the sub bass is coming out. So that's what is very important, and that's where a lot of the newcomers struggle, is that they have their kick and bass sounding great, but it's not distinguishing between each other. It's just all kind of like mixed up into one big thing. That is very important to master at the very early stage. I didn't master, by the way. Now I mastered it and I feel great. But I feel like the newcomer should master that at the very beginning, because that will save a lot of your time almost tearing up your hair follicles and hairs, because you're not able to master the kick and the bass the right way. So I'm gonna go a bit more into this to make it sound even fatter. So if I do this, now remember how I said that you wanna turn up the band between this to, I would turn it up a little bit. Now you can hear the kick and sound a little bit more like balanced again, but the bass is slowly kind of, higher frequency level of the bass is slowly not visible anymore. So for that reason, what you want to do is you're gonna then start mixing up the bass. So I'm just going to quickly turn down a little bit of brightness on this kick so that it sounds more better. So for me, that's like almost like in a quick manner, that's how a kick would sound like at the very early stage in a very professional way. But then you kind of want to make sure the kick kind of balances out with it, with the bass. So for that, what you would do is you want to do a bit of saturation. On this one, I use something called deep analog bass preset. Basically what it does is it drives or adds a little bit of more drive on certain frequency rather than just saturating multiband. So did the same thing. I added like a couple of bands here, but one band is more driving than the other band. So when I said drive, it's kind of like adding a little bit of attack and like a very less release at the same time. So on this particular band, there's a little bit of drive. This particular band has a little bit of drive. You can see it right here. And this particular band has a little bit of drive here as well. Versus if you look into these ones, you will see each one of them has less. So a bit brighter red color means it has higher drive. So you can see right here. So I added a little bit more drive here. So if I turn it off, you'll hear the sound difference. Then you're gonna hear time. No, I'm just kidding. Like the Anna's time track. But yeah. So then what I wanted to do is, even though saturation is doing its trick, I still want to make sure the bass kind of cuts through with the kick. So what I do at that point is I start adding some compression. That's where the compression comes in. You should never add saturation after compression. Always start with saturation first and then do compression. So if I go in this, Let's do SSL style compressor. So I normally use either an SSL-E, or I use something called Townhouse, which does a very analog emulation. So this is what I use. So what normally I would do is a little bit of attack. I keep the release in auto, threshold turned down a little bit. I don't know if you can see it bigger. Let me see if it allows me to allow bigger. I don't think this is like a very small one, but normally it's doing is its attack, ratio, release, and makeup. So when your threshold is low, you want to make sure you make up a little bit more from that. And the ratio for bass, a lot of people would say 4.1. I find 2.1 sounds a little bit more punchier in terms of the ratio. But let's listen to it. Let's see how it sounds. So that's basically all it is when it comes to the actual bass and kick. There's not a lot I do in terms of processing. Sometimes on kick, I don't even do anything other than just a little bit of saturation. Unless I really like a kick and I want it to sound exactly like that, I normally would do some EQing and some compression afterwards. But that's basically it. You don't need to get too overwhelmed with kick and bass, but as long as you know the main holy grail behind it, you should be fine. So I think we're supposed to do for 2 hours. I'm already past like the 2 hours mark. So I'm gonna let you guys have if you guys have any question, Amanda or Mahmoud or Ian, even Brett is here. If Brett, you wanna start up doing music production, ask some questions, fire away.
Anyone?
Yeah, the mic is all yours. So if you guys have any question.
Does saturation go like first in the chain always?
It really depends. So when you're using a sample or even a synth, if you're using a sample, it could actually require a bit of EQ first, because if your sample have harshness. So for example, if you're sampling a track, for example, so those tracks, you definitely want to EQ first because it's already a processed sample. If you're using a sample pack, listen to the sample that you picked. Like, does it sound good just as its own? If it is, then start with saturation a little bit. And when you do saturation, so whatever you do a saturation in a technical or like in a very general term, is that you're boosting certain frequencies on the multiband saturation or a saturation as a whole. So you're basically boosting those frequencies to stand out or sound a lot more audible than usual. So if certain frequencies on your sample due to saturation sounds very harsh, then you have to come back with adding another EQ to tone down those harshness.
Okay.
So the way how EQ works is basically if you compress or if you saturate or if you modulate or if you distort, EQ is there to like tone those things down.
Got it.
That's my way of doing things. I do not like boosting EQ to like modulate stuff, but I know a lot of my colleagues who uses EQ as a modulation or boosting stuff or even like a saturation. So
Sweet.
any other questions? I don't know if Ian's mic is working or not.
I think it's working now.
Yeah, there you go.
Finally.
Hey, buddy.
There we go. Yeah. So, all right. So last time we talked to you, had helped me out with the SEO2. What's your next piece of gear that you're looking at purchasing or maybe using? Myself, like you, I prefer just having the hard piece of gear right there in my hand so that way I can manipulate. I'll play with all the little knobs. What's your next piece of gear that you're looking at adding to your collection, if anything?
So I was actually just trying to decide between when I was working with this, I was trying to decide between Grandmother and Jupiter XM, but I ended up taking the Grandmother now because the Jupiter XM is not fully analog. So there's a lot of this synthesizers now coming up with this hybrid. So it's digital and then it's like has that analog touch to it. So I thought about getting the Jupiter, but maybe I'm still not gonna do that because I have so many great soft synths. I just find buying a synth that actually emulates digital sound is completely useless for me, because I have all these synthesizers on my computer that actually does exactly that. So anything that is analog, I definitely want to buy. So next thing I think I'm going to do, I'm going to go a little bit cheaper on my pocket on this one. It's going to be the Behringer Pro 1. So I'm thinking of getting that as the next one. Actually, Brett, you might actually can relate to this. So Ben Bomer's all sound that you hear, some of them are produced on Behringer Pro 1. So there you go.
Yeah, definitely. Ever since we had that little sit down with my SEO2, I literally can't put it down. I literally just sit there all day, every day, making noise. I call it noise, but
yeah, I'm gonna do a Twitch one day, but I'll just stream myself. So what I will do is I'm just gonna do like just SEO2 one day, so that way you can learn a little bit. But definitely recommend you to get the extension box. By the way, what it does, it's like almost like a distortion pedal, but it does a lot more than that in my opinion, because like the cutoff knob on that actual synth is so small and tiny, it doesn't give the actual precision of the filter. So extension box basically made the filter such a way that you get that whole Moog feel to it, but it also has like a very precision on your filter cutoff, so it's good. Any other questions before I wrap it up for today? And let me see if you guys had any questions on those are on Twitch right now.
I don't see any Twitch questions.
I see P-Wing. Yeah, I mean, definitely the arrangement part is very, very crucial. Arrangement and stereo spectrum are where the money is when it comes to producing music. I think since we're like very last part of it, I can just quickly explain to you guys when it comes to like stereo spectrum with a quick like a graph, I guess. So like how I said, the kick has to sit in the middle. Everything else kind of spreads around a little bit. So basically what I meant by that is, let me share my screen again quickly. So I meant by like, you have to have say kick and bass and everything sits right here. And then if I add another one, then you kind of want to have snare, having snare on the middle, but also you kind of want to have a layer that kind of like have a little bit of a spectrum. Then you also want to have like your pluck sounds or your what do you call like lead sounds. Those ones then start spreading out a little bit, and the hi-hats and then your clap, they have to like sound a little bit spread it out. It all cannot like be all playing at the same time, because if that happens, then you start to sound hollow, or the track can sound like thin and all that. And also another thing is that layering matters. And when you're layering like multiple tracks, make sure each layer has its own place on your audio spectrum, not just like stacked up and just placed there. But yeah, that's basically all it is I have. Mahmoud, do you have any questions? I think your mic is muted. If you have any questions or concerns you had that I could help you with.
Everything is perfect and clear.
Okay, so I would love to actually hear your track. So this is something I want to tell everyone also on Twitch or YouTube or Twitter. Or if this is a rebroadcast, which I'm going to do for Facebook, if you guys have any questions, just leave it on the comment section. Afterwards, I will try to reply to it. And if you want to submit us a demo, it's basically my promo email, but just make sure the subject line says demo on it so that it goes on my demo inbox. That's how I kind of have the filter on. And we are open to any kind of demos. Normally it would be entered by me directly. Then if we like it, we should be able to sign it for compilations or even solo release.
Perfect.
Alrighty, so I am going to sign off. Thanks so much for joining in, guys. I'm definitely going to do this a lot more again.
Thanks a lot.
Especially I'm going to do a couple of studio sessions, just me producing tracks. So keep an eye on those. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you guys.